What's it like to conduct an orchestra? I'm almost afraid to tell you because if I tell you how much fun it is, then everybody will want to become a conductor. Conducting is a gestural language that communicates specific information to a group of musicians. So I'm showing how fast we're going, I'm showing how loud, how soft, this needs to be a little louder, this should be a little softer, so balancing things, and also what we call articulation, how short, how long, whether something should be pressed a little harder or whether something should be kind of softened out. So the conductor's job really is to come up with one interpretation and get everybody on board so that they're all making the same piece in the same way. It's really magical. And especially in performance with a good orchestra who's flexible, if you want to try something new and they go with you and you never talked about it, it's just you moved a little bit in this way and they moved in that way. It's really quite special, that the depth of that connection when no words are exchanged. I started at 15. Yeah, I really had no idea what I was doing. But you know, when you're that age, things don't seem hard, even though they really are. And so I'm grateful actually to have kind of cut my teeth when I didn't have the fear of failure as much. Got involved conducting here. I had a very supportive teacher, David Wallace, who's now retired, gave me a lot of really unusual opportunities for an undergraduate. And then I went from there to graduate school at the Kansas City Conservatory and then to my doctorate at UCLA. I conduct the University Symphony Orchestra, which is a full symphony, 80 members from across the campus community, about half of whom are music majors and the other half represent all the different colleges and departments of Western. I find music absolutely fascinating for a few reasons. Number one, what we get as classical musicians from composers is a very sophisticated system of notation that still leaves a lot up to the interpreter to figure out. So a piece of music is essentially a recipe, and there's a lot in the recipe that's assumed. And I love that meeting of the concrete sophisticated notation and what the interpreter, the artist, has to backfill. Writing for orchestra is so difficult, and getting a work performed by an orchestra is so difficult that composers really put their all into these pieces, and they mean a lot to them. So to take something that is so precious to the person that wrote it and foster it is a real honor, whether that person is living or not. I think what we've done here at Western in this year is something that I really will cherish. The students are wonderful and hardworking and curious and game really to do anything, which is very exciting as a conductor. Usually this orchestra gives one concert a quarter. We kept with that in the fall, but then had 2 concerts in winter and spring as well. So going from an 8 or 9 week rehearsal period down to a 5-week rehearsal period for each concert. That's a great question. Are all eyes on me if the orchestra's playing? Well, it's sort of like they have to be reading the music. And they occasionally, if they're playing a long note, they can look up from the note and look back down at it. But most of the communication is through peripheral vision. So they can see the motion even though they're not looking at me directly. They can still keep track of where I'm at with the motion. There are always little adjustments all the time. And you train an orchestra to be sensitive to that by doing it in rehearsal. I think orchestral music is fantastic and exciting and fascinating and interesting and completely accessible to people who know a lot about music or don't know anything about music. When you have 80 people on stage, going for it 100%, playing like as loudly as possible or as softly as possible, there's something really gripping about that. It's like, because we conductors, we don't actually make sound. which is the odd thing being a musician. We move through the air and we communicate how we want sounds to be. But it almost is like the sound becomes tangible if the orchestra is really responsive. And you can draw a line through the air, and it's almost like you're moving something, or you're moving through fluid, or you can see the trace behind it in the sound. And that's a really magical, surreal thing.